Some of the most dangerous things people take from you do not look dangerous at first. It is not always betrayal. It is not always disrespect in its obvious form. Sometimes it is just one more favor, one more interruption, one more demand for your patience, your time, your energy. And if you are not careful, those small moments begin to shape your life. They teach people that you will always be available, always be understanding, always be willing to give a little more of yourself away. But this is how self-respect is often lost, not in one dramatic moment, but in quiet patterns repeated over time. Stoic wisdom reminds us that peace begins where boundaries begin. Protecting your time, your inner balance, and your emotional space is not selfish. It is how you stop abandoning yourself just to keep everyone else comfortable. And in this episode, we are going to talk about 10 things you should never give people, even if they ask. Number 1. Never give them your time on demand. One of the quietest ways people lose themselves is by letting others decide when they are available. It rarely begins with something dramatic. It starts with small interruptions that seem harmless. A message that expects an immediate reply. A sudden call that assumes your moment can be entered without warning. A favor that is presented as small, urgent, and impossible to refuse. None of this looks serious at first. That is exactly why it becomes dangerous. Because when these moments repeat, they teach people that your time is always open, always flexible, always ready to serve whatever they want right now. The Stoic mind sees this clearly. Time is not just part of life, it is life. And when you hand it away too easily, you are not just losing minutes. You are losing attention, direction, and inner order. Your day begins to revolve around outside urgency instead of inner purpose. You wake up with your own priorities, but little by little they are pushed aside by whoever reaches for you first. After a while, you are still busy, still active, still responding, yet strangely disconnected from what actually matters to you. That kind of exhaustion is difficult to explain, because from the outside, it looks like responsibility. But inside, it feels like disappearance. Many people are taught to believe that constant availability is a virtue. They think it proves kindness, loyalty, or good character. But there is a difference between generosity and surrender. Generosity is chosen. Surrender happens when access to you becomes expected. The first comes from strength. The second comes from fear, guilt, or habit. And once people get used to immediate access, they stop seeing your time as valuable. Not always because they are cruel, but because what is always available is rarely treated with care. This is why so many people feel mentally crowded without understanding why. Their attention is never fully their own. Their thoughts are broken before they deepen. Their plans are interrupted before they settle. Their day is divided into fragments by other people's needs, moods, poor planning, or emotional dependence. The real damage is not just lost productivity, it is the slow training of the self. Every time you drop your own priorities to satisfy someone else's demand, you send yourself a message. My focus can wait. My peace can move, my life can be rearranged, and when that message repeats long enough, self-respect becomes unstable. A healthy boundary around time is not selfish. It is an act of sanity. It is how you protect the part of life where your mind becomes clear, your work becomes meaningful, and your character becomes steady. Sometimes strength sounds very simple. I can't talk right now. I'll reply later. I'm not available today. These are not harsh sentences. They are clean ones. They remind both you and others that your time is not a public hallway anyone can walk through whenever they wish. And something important happens when you begin protecting it. People reveal themselves. Those who truly respect you will adjust. Those who only valued your convenience may become irritated the moment access is no longer automatic. Let that teach you something. The problem was never your boundary. The problem was the entitlement that existed before it. Your time is your attention is your life. Once you understand that, you stop giving it away on demand. You stop treating interruption like duty, and you begin living with more intention, more calm, and more loyalty to the life you are actually trying to build. Number 2. Never give them free access to your emotional energy. There are people who do not come into your life to share peace. They come to place their chaos somewhere else. At first, this can look like closeness. They call you every time something goes wrong. They bring you the same emotional storm again and again. They speak for a long time, but rarely to reflect, rarely to grow, rarely to understand themselves more deeply. They speak to unload. And because you are caring, because you know how to listen, because your heart does not like turning away from pain, you stay open, you absorb, you comfort, you carry. But after enough of these conversations, you start noticing a pattern. They leave lighter, you leave heavier. They feel relieved, you feel drained, and what looked like connection begins to reveal itself as emotional extraction. This is one of the quietest ways inner balance is lost. Not through open conflict, but through repeated exposure to energy that has no intention of becoming responsible for itself. The Stoic mind does not teach coldness, but it does teach discernment. It asks you to notice what kind of exchange is taking place. Is this person seeking truth, or are they simply seeking somewhere to pour their unrest? Are they trying to understand life better, or are they using your nervous system as a place to dump what they refuse to process within themselves? That difference matters, because compassion without boundaries quickly becomes exhaustion. A lot of good people confuse emotional availability with moral duty. They believe that if someone is hurting, they must always be present, always be ready, always be soft enough to receive whatever is brought to them. But that is not wisdom. That is overexposure. Your emotional energy is not an endless public resource. It is part of your health. It shapes the quality of your thoughts, the steadiness of your body, the atmosphere of your day. When you let anyone enter that inner space whenever they need relief, without care for what it costs you, you begin paying for other people's lack of discipline with your own peace. And this becomes even more dangerous when the relationship is built on repetition instead of growth. Some people do not really want help. They want access. They want a familiar place where they can rehearse the same pain, repeat the same story, avoid the same responsibility, and leave feeling temporarily soothed without ever changing. In those moments, your listening is no longer healing them. It is supporting a cycle. You become part of the machinery of their emotional avoidance. That may sound harsh, but it is often true. When someone constantly empties themselves into you, but never works to become lighter on their own, your kindness is no longer serving life. It is serving dependence. This is why you must learn to protect the emotional door, not just the physical one. Not every conversation deserves full access to your heart. Not every person who is distressed deserves unlimited entry into your inner world. There is a calm and necessary difference between being compassionate and being available for emotional dumping. One comes from strength, the other creates depletion. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is listen briefly without letting yourself be pulled under. Sometimes care sounds like, "I'm sorry you're dealing with this, but I'm not in the space to hold it right now." Sometimes maturity means refusing to become the place where unmanaged emotions are dropped every single time life becomes uncomfortable for someone else. And when you begin doing this, something important becomes clear. The people who truly value you will not only want your comfort, they will also respect your capacity. They will notice when you are tired. They will sense that care must move both ways. But those who were only using your calm as a container for their confusion may react badly when your openness is no longer automatic. Let them react. Their disappointment is not always proof that you became unkind. Sometimes it is only proof that they had become too comfortable consuming what was never meant to be free. Your peace is not selfish. Your emotional steadiness is not selfish. The energy you need to think clearly, sleep deeply, speak gently, and remain rooted in yourself is not something you should hand away just because someone else refuses to build that stability within their own life. You can love people and still limit their access. You can care and still step back. You can be warm without becoming absorbent. And that may be one of the deepest forms of self-respect, learning that not every burden placed near you is yours to carry, and not every person in pain is entitled to make your inner life their place of relief. Number 3, never let them sit inside your decisions. One of the easiest ways to become lost in your own life is to let too many people sit inside choices that were never meant to belong to them. It usually begins innocently. You want perspective, you want reassurance, you want to make the right move, so you open the door a little. You ask one person what they think, then another, until the decision no longer feels like something you are making from clarity. It starts feeling like something you are trying to defend, justify, or reshape so it can survive other people's opinions. And that is where something subtle begins to break. Because the more voices you invite into your inner process, the harder it becomes to hear your own. This is not because advice is always bad. Sometimes wise counsel can protect you from pride, impulse, or blindness. But advice becomes dangerous the moment it starts replacing judgment. The problem is not hearing others. The problem is slowly losing trust in the part of yourself that must ultimately live with the consequence. A Stoic mind understands that peace requires inner authority. If every major choice must be approved by other people before you can act, then your life will never feel fully yours. You may still move forward, but you will do so with borrowed confidence, and borrowed confidence collapses the moment disapproval enters the room. A lot of people hand over their decisions because they're afraid of being wrong alone. That fear is deeply human. It feels safer to make choices with a committee around you. Safer to say, well, they agreed, if things fall apart. Safer to spread responsibility across many voices so that failure hurts less. But that kind of safety has a hidden cost. It weakens self-command. It trains you to consult outward before you consult inward. And, after enough repetition, even simple choices begin to feel heavy because you are no longer deciding from grounded conviction. You are waiting for permission to trust yourself. What makes this even more dangerous is that other people rarely carry your life with the same depth that you do. They speak from their own fears, their own preferences, their own comfort zones, their own understanding of what seems reasonable. Even those who love you may unconsciously guide you toward the version of life that makes the most sense to them, not the one that is most true for you. Some will advise caution because they fear risk. Some will advise compromise because your change makes them uncomfortable. Some will tell you what is practical when your soul is asking for what is meaningful. None of this makes them evil. It simply means their voice cannot become your center. There is a quiet dignity in making a thoughtful decision and allowing it to belong to you. Not because you are stubborn, not because you reject all wisdom, but because you understand that a life directed by constant, outside input becomes fragmented. The Stoics returned again and again to the idea that judgment is sacred, not perfect, but sacred. Your mind must be trained, sharpened, and disciplined so that when the time comes to choose, you are not thrown around by pressure, mood, or public opinion. That kind of steadiness cannot grow if every decision is turned into a group discussion. Sometimes the most mature thing you can do is keep a decision private until it is ready. Not every move needs commentary. Not every desire needs to be exposed while it is still forming. There are choices that grow stronger in silence, because silence protects them from unnecessary doubt. The moment you place a tender decision in too many hands, it becomes vulnerable to confusion. A path that felt clear can suddenly feel crowded. A direction that felt alive can begin to feel uncertain, not because it was wrong, but because too many people touched it before it had roots. And this is why protecting your decisions is really about protecting your inner clarity. Listen carefully when wisdom appears. Learn from people who have earned your respect. But do not let your life become so open to influence that you forget who must walk it. At the end of the day, you are the one who will wake up inside the result. You are the one who will carry the regret if you betray yourself. You are the one who must live with the quiet knowledge of whether you chose from truth or from pressure. So let others offer light, but do not hand them the wheel. A calm life requires many things, but one of them is this: the courage to let your decisions remain your own. Number 4. Never reward disrespect with silence. There is a kind of silence that comes from wisdom, and then there is a kind that comes from fear. From the outside, they can look almost the same. In both cases, a person says very little. In both cases, there is no dramatic argument, no raised voice, no visible fight. But inwardly, they are completely different. One silence is chosen because the moment is too small to deserve your peace. The other is chosen because part of you is afraid that if you speak, you will lose love, create tension, or force people to see that you are no longer willing to be handled carelessly. And this second kind of silence is dangerous because it does not protect dignity. It slowly erodes it. Disrespect rarely enters a relationship in its full form at the beginning. It usually arrives in smaller ways first: a dismissive tone, a joke that cuts a little too close, being interrupted again and again as if your words carry less weight. A habit of speaking to you only when convenient, then ignoring your needs when the direction changes. These moments can seem minor when viewed one by one, and that is why many people stay quiet. They tell themselves it is not serious enough. They do not want to look sensitive. They do not want to make everything into a problem, so they swallow it. They let it pass. They keep the peace. But what they do not always see is that repeated silence does not only end the moment, it teaches the other person what they can keep doing. This is one of the most important truths about boundaries. People do not only learn from what you say, they learn from what your silence continues to allow. If someone crosses the line once and meets clear resistance, the line becomes visible. But if they cross it again and again and meet nothing, the line begins to disappear. Eventually, what once would have shocked you becomes normal. And that is how self-respect is not always destroyed by one large humiliation. Sometimes it is worn down by many small, tolerated ones. The Stoic approach is often misunderstood here. People imagine that Stoicism means enduring everything quietly, never reacting, never confronting, never showing that something is wrong. But that is not strength. That is passivity wearing the mask of maturity. A Stoic mind is not weak, numb, or endlessly tolerant. It is disciplined. It knows how to separate noise from principle. It knows that some things should be ignored because they are beneath your attention, while other things must be addressed because allowing them would create disorder in the soul. The point is not to become emotionally loud. The point is to become morally clear. Sometimes the strongest response is not anger, it is a calm sentence spoken without apology. Do not speak to me like that. That was disrespectful. I'm not available for this kind of behavior. These words are not dramatic, but they carry weight because they come from self-possession. They do not beg. They do not over-explain. They simply name what happened and refuse to cooperate with it. That is a very different kind of power than emotional reaction. Reaction gives others your turbulence. Clarity gives them your standard. And that standard matters, because when disrespect is repeatedly met with silence, resentment begins growing in secret. You may look composed on the outside, but inwardly you start carrying a private heaviness. You replay conversations later. You think of what you should have said. You feel angry not only at the other person, but at yourself for staying quiet. That is the hidden cost. Silence may preserve the surface for a moment, but if it comes at the expense of your truth, it creates a deeper fracture inside you. You begin betraying yourself to keep the atmosphere comfortable for someone else. Of course, not every slight deserves a confrontation. Wisdom still requires proportion. Some people are careless once and correct themselves quickly. Some moments are too small to carry forward. But when a pattern becomes visible, your silence stops being peace and starts becoming permission. At that point, speaking is not aggression, it is honesty. It is how you remind the world that your calm should not be mistaken for weakness, and your patience should not be mistaken for access without consequence. A peaceful life is not built by avoiding every uncomfortable moment. It is built by refusing to abandon yourself inside those moments. Sometimes a relationship improves the moment you stop making disrespect so easy to survive. Sometimes it ends, but even then something important is restored, your own alignment. And there is a deep kind of relief in that. The relief of knowing that your voice is no longer absent when your dignity is present. The relief of knowing that your silence is now a choice, not a surrender. That is when it becomes strength again. Number 5. Never give endless chances to repeated behavior. Forgiveness can be beautiful, but many people use that word to hide a painful habit. They keep reopening the door to the same behavior, from the same person, with the same result, and then call it compassion. At first it feels noble. You tell yourself everyone makes mistakes. You tell yourself people need patience, room to grow, space to correct themselves. And sometimes that is true. Human beings are imperfect, and relationships do require mercy. But there is a difference between mercy and self-betrayal. There is a difference between allowing one honest mistake and continuing to offer access to someone who has already shown you that your pain does not change their pattern. This is where many good-hearted people get trapped. They do not suffer because they cannot see what is happening. Often they suffer because they can see it clearly and still feel guilty for responding to it clearly. They notice the same disrespect, the same manipulation, the same broken promise, the same emotional carelessness, and yet a part of them keeps whispering, maybe this time will be different. Maybe they understood now. Maybe I just need to be more patient, more understanding, less rigid. But when behavior repeats without real change, another chance does not come from love anymore. It comes from reluctance to accept reality. The Stoic mind is grounded in reality before comfort. It asks a simple question: what is actually happening here? Not what was promised, not what was explained, not what you hope is hidden beneath the behavior. What is the pattern? Because patterns tell the truth more honestly than apologies do. Anyone can feel regret in a moment. Anyone can say the right words when consequences finally arrive. But the deeper measure of character is repetition. What does this person do once the emotion passes? What returns when life becomes inconvenient again? If the same wound keeps arriving through a different apology, then the lesson is no longer about their confusion. It is about your willingness to keep standing where the wound can reach you. That is the hard part. People often imagine that strength means being hard, quick to cut people off, quick to judge, quick to close the door forever. But real strength is quieter than that. It does not rush. It observes. It gives space where space is deserved, yet it also refuses to lie to itself. And one of the deepest lies a person can tell themselves is this: staying open to repeated harm proves I have a good heart. No, It may only prove that you are afraid to disappoint others with the truth of your boundary. Some people do not change because they said sorry. They change because they accepted responsibility deeply enough to become different. That difference can be felt. It has weight. It shows up in effort, in consistency, in humility, in altered behavior over time. Without that, endless chances only create a soft environment where accountability never fully lands. You may think you are being kind, but in reality, you may be teaching the other person that remorse is enough to regain access, even when respect never truly improved. And at the same time, you are teaching yourself something dangerous too, that your hurt is negotiable, that your peace can be postponed, that your trust can be renewed without evidence. There comes a moment when another chance is no longer generous. It becomes expensive. Expensive to your nervous system, expensive to your sleep, expensive to your self-respect. You begin carrying vigilance where there should have been ease. You begin preparing for disappointment while pretending to believe in change. And that inner split is exhausting. Part of you wants to protect yourself. Another part keeps trying to preserve the relationship at any cost. The Stoics would remind us that inner conflict grows whenever we resist what reality has already shown us. This does not mean you must become bitter. It does not mean you must hate the person, punish them, or make a spectacle of your withdrawal. Often the most powerful boundary is very calm. You simply stop offering the kind of access that repeated behavior has made unsafe. You forgive, perhaps, but you do not return things to their old place. You release the anger without restoring the same privilege. That is maturity, because forgiveness is about freeing your heart from poison. Continued access is about trust, and trust cannot live on hope alone. A peaceful life requires remembering that not every relationship should be carried farther than the truth can support. Sometimes love becomes wiser when it stops excusing patterns. Sometimes self-respect appears in the simple decision to believe what has been shown more than what has been promised. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do, both for yourself and for the other person, is to let consequences speak where your endless understanding once did. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. And clarity is often the moment real peace begins. Number 6. Never explain every boundary you set. One of the quiet mistakes people make when they finally begin protecting themselves is this. They feel the need to explain every boundary until it sounds acceptable to the other person. They do not just say no. They build a case for it. They justify it, soften it, decorate it, and wrap it in so much reasoning that the boundary starts losing its shape. And the more they speak, the more the other person begins to feel invited into a negotiation. That is the trap. What began as a clear limit slowly turns into a discussion about whether your limit is reasonable enough to deserve respect. This happens because many people are not afraid of setting a boundary. They are afraid of being misunderstood for setting one. They want to be seen as kind, fair, mature, and emotionally intelligent. So instead of saying, "I'm not available for that," they keep going. They explain their stress, their schedule, their history, their feelings, their intentions, their exhaustion, hoping the other person will not take it personally. But in trying so hard to make the boundary painless for someone else, they often make it weak for themselves. A clear no becomes a long emotional defense, and once that happens, the focus shifts. It is no longer about your standard. It becomes about whether the other person agrees with your reasoning. The Stoic mind understands something simple and powerful. Not every boundary requires permission to exist. Some things are true because they protect your peace, your dignity, your time, your inner order. That is enough. You do not need a courtroom argument every time you decide what is and is not allowed near your life. In fact, over-explaining often reveals inner uncertainty. It tells the other person, without meaning to, that if they push hard enough, question enough, or make you feel guilty enough, the line might move. And for people who benefit from weak boundaries, that is all the opening they need. There is also another cost to constant explanation. It drains you. Every time you rehearse your reasons in detail, you are forced to mentally relive the burden that made the boundary necessary in the first place. You keep revisiting what hurt you, what exhausted you, what crossed the line, as if your pain must be translated perfectly before it earns the right to be respected. But healthy relationships do not require endless defense of basic self-respect. People may not always like your limit, but they should still be able to recognize that it is yours to set. This does not mean you must become cold or abrupt. Calmness still matters. Tone still matters, wisdom still matters, but calmness is not the same as explanation without end. Sometimes the strongest boundary is the shortest one. That doesn't work for me. I'm not doing that. I need space. I won't continue this conversation. These are complete sentences. They are not cruel. They are not dramatic. They simply refuse to turn self-protection into a debate. And that refusal is important because some people do not listen to explanations in order to understand you. They listen in order to find the weak point in your language. Once you see that, your relationship with boundaries begins to change. You stop measuring their validity by how well they are received. You stop thinking a no has failed simply because someone became disappointed, confused, or offended by it. Their reaction is information, not instruction. It may tell you what they wanted from you. It may reveal how accustomed they were to your flexibility, but it does not tell you whether your boundary was wrong. A boundary can be absolutely necessary and still be inconvenient to someone else. Peace grows when your no becomes cleaner, not louder, cleaner, fewer words, less guilt, less performance, more self-trust. Because in the end, a boundary is not a request for understanding, it is a decision about access. And when you understand that, you stop explaining yourself as if your limits must earn approval before they can become real. You state them with calm, you hold them with consistency, and you let people adjust to the truth that your life is no longer open to endless negotiation. Number 7. Never hand them the power to define your worth. There is something more dangerous than losing time, more destabilizing than giving too much energy, and more difficult to recover than a bad decision. It is the habit of letting other people decide what you are worth. Not openly, perhaps. Not in a way you would admit immediately. It often happens quietly. You begin watching how they respond to you, how much attention they give you, how warmly they speak to you when you succeed, how differently they treat you when you disappoint them, how quickly they return when you are useful, and how distant they become when you are not. Little by little, without noticing it, their approval starts acting like a mirror. And once that happens, your peace becomes unstable, because your value now rises and falls according to hands that were never steady enough to hold it. This is one of the deepest forms of inner dependence. A person may appear strong on the outside, productive, composed, admired even, yet still be living under a quiet form of slavery within. They are always reading the room, always sensing who approves, who withdraws, who validates, who withholds affection. Their mood changes with other people's reactions. Their confidence is real for a moment, then fragile again the moment someone seems unimpressed. That is not because they are weak. It is because they have made the oldest mistake of all. They placed their internal measure of value in a place outside their own character. The Stoics were relentless about this point. They believed that a human being must anchor worth in what can actually be governed: judgment, conduct, integrity, courage, discipline, truthfulness. Not applause, not status, not desire from others, not admiration, not being chosen. Because the moment your worth depends on what other people feel about you, you are no longer living from center. You are performing for weather, and weather changes. People admire you when it is convenient. They praise you when your choices make sense to them. They celebrate you when your light benefits their image, their comfort, or their needs. But human opinion is restless. If that becomes your mirror, then your identity will never stop trembling. A lot of suffering begins here. People stay in places where they are tolerated instead of respected because they are waiting for one more sign that they matter. They overgive in relationships because being appreciated has started to feel like proof of existence. They become smaller, softer, more agreeable, more available, not because that is their true nature, but because they are terrified of losing the approval that has quietly become their source of emotional oxygen. And the tragedy is that the more you depend on external validation, the easier it becomes for others to shape you. Whoever controls your need for approval begins controlling your behavior. That is why this must be guarded so carefully. You must never hand someone the power to tell you directly or indirectly whether you are enough. Their disappointment cannot define you. Their neglect cannot define you. Their inability to see your value cannot become evidence that value is missing. Some people fail to recognize depth because they only know how to measure convenience. Some overlook loyalty because they are addicted to novelty. Some diminish others because recognizing real worth would force them to confront their own emptiness. None of that should become your identity. There is a calmer and stronger place to stand. You begin to ask different questions, not "do they approve of me?" but "am I living in a way I can respect?" Not "did they choose me?" but "am I betraying myself to be chosen?" Not "how do I look in their eyes?" but "what kind of person am I becoming when no one is rewarding me?" That shift changes everything. It moves worth away from reaction and places it back in character. It frees you from the exhausting task of trying to be felt correctly by everyone around you. And once that freedom begins, you notice something important. Rejection hurts less. Praise becomes lighter. Silence from others stops sounding like a verdict. You still feel things, of course. You are human. But you no longer collapse every time someone fails to confirm your value. You stop chasing mirrors that distort you. You stop begging life to send proof that you matter. You begin building a quieter certainty, one rooted in how you live, how you carry yourself, what you refuse, what you endure, and what you remain loyal to when no one is clapping. Your worth is too sacred to be placed in unstable hands. Let people misunderstand you. Let some overlook you. Let some fail to choose you. None of that has the authority to reduce what is real in you. The deepest peace begins when you stop asking the world to define your value and start living in a way that makes your own soul recognize it. That kind of worth does not swing with opinion. It does not beg for witnesses. It stands quietly, firmly, and because it is no longer borrowed, it cannot be taken away by the moods of others. Number 8. Never expose your healing before it is strong enough. Not every stage of your growth needs an audience. In fact, some of the most important changes in a person's life begin quietly, almost invisibly, in a place that is still too tender to survive public contact. Healing is often like that. At the start, it is not loud or impressive. It is fragile. It is uneven. Some days it feels real, and on other days it feels as if one small comment, one careless opinion, or one familiar wound could pull you back into the version of yourself you are trying to leave behind. That is why you must be careful with what you reveal too early. Because when something inside you is still forming, exposure can become interference. A lot of people make this mistake because they are hungry for connection, reassurance, or recognition. They want someone to see that they are changing. They want support. They want to speak about the new boundary, the new habit, the new peace they are trying to build. And sometimes that comes from innocence. Sometimes it comes from hope. But not everyone who hears about your healing will protect it. Some will question it. Some will mock it. Some will compare it to who you used to be. Some will test it without even realizing they are doing so. And others, especially those who benefited from your old wounds, may feel threatened the moment they sense you are becoming harder to control. This is why silence can be medicine. Not secrecy rooted in shame, but privacy rooted in wisdom. The Stoic mind understands that what is still weak must often be guarded until it develops strength. If you are learning to leave a toxic pattern, you do not need everyone commenting on your progress. If you are rebuilding your self-respect, you do not need people who only knew your brokenness reminding you of who you used to be. If you are learning how not to return to old emotional habits, you do not need your unfinished healing placed in rooms where doubt, projection, and unnecessary opinions can reach it too easily. There is also another danger in exposing your healing too early: the pressure to perform it. The moment your private growth becomes public, you may start feeling that you have to look stronger than you are. You may begin speaking like someone fully healed, when, in truth, you are still trying not to collapse in old ways. That pressure creates distance between your real process and the image of progress you feel expected to maintain. And once that happens, healing can become theater. You start trying to appear transformed instead of allowing transformation to happen at its own pace. Real healing rarely moves in a straight line. It has hesitation in it. It has setbacks. It has moments of clarity followed by moments of grief. It has quiet days where nothing seems visible, yet something deep is still being repaired beneath the surface. That process needs gentleness, not an audience. It needs space where you can be honest, inconsistent, and human without feeling observed. Some of your most sacred growth will happen in silence, not because it is weak, but because it is still becoming stable enough to live in the world without collapsing under outside pressure. And this is where self-respect becomes part of recovery. You begin asking yourself a different question, not who should know what I'm going through, but what part of me still needs protection. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is keep your healing close until it has roots. Let people see the fruit later. Let them notice the calm in your voice, the distance in your old triggers, the steadiness in your choices. But do not rush to reveal the seed before it can survive the weather. Not every change needs to be announced while it is still vulnerable. There is no shame in guarding your becoming. You are not hiding because you are false. You are protecting what is unfinished because it matters. A peaceful life requires knowing that not everything precious should be exposed in its earliest form. Some things must be carried quietly until they are strong enough to stand without defense, and healing is one of them. Give it time, give it privacy, give it the dignity of growing without interference. Then, when it is ready, it will no longer need to be explained. It will be visible in the way you live. Number 9. Never feel guilty for choosing yourself. One of the most difficult things for a good-hearted person to learn is that choosing yourself will often disappoint people who had quietly become comfortable with your self-neglect. They liked your kindness when it was easy to access. They praised your patience when it cost you sleep, energy, and peace. They admired how understanding you were when that understanding always moved in their favor. But the moment you begin protecting your time, your mind, your emotional balance, something changes. What they once called kindness, they may now call distance. What they once benefited from, they may now accuse you of withholding. And if you are not careful, you will mistake their disappointment for proof that you have done something wrong. This is where guilt becomes a trap. Not healthy guilt, the kind that appears when you have truly acted against your values, but false guilt, the kind that shows up the moment you stop overextending yourself for the comfort of others. It whispers that you are selfish for needing space, selfish for saying no, selfish for not answering immediately, selfish for refusing to carry what was never yours. And because many people were raised to associate love with self-sacrifice, that guilt can feel convincing. It can make a peaceful boundary feel like cruelty. It can make self-respect feel like betrayal. But the Stoic mind asks a calmer question. What exactly are you guilty of? Of resting when you are tired, of protecting your attention so your life does not become scattered, of refusing to be emotionally available on demand, of no longer abandoning your own needs so others can remain comfortable in their habits. None of that is selfishness. It is order. It is maturity. It is the refusal to keep harming yourself just so no one else has to adjust. Many people do not react badly when you choose yourself because you have become a worse person. They react because your new boundary interrupts an arrangement that benefited them. That does not automatically make them malicious. Some are simply used to an older version of you. They learned to rely on your over-availability, your softness, your willingness to absorb inconvenience without complaint. So when you become clearer, calmer, less reachable in unhealthy ways, they feel the loss of access. And rather than admit that, they may try to make you feel guilty for changing. This is why guilt must be examined carefully. Not every uncomfortable feeling is a moral warning. Sometimes it is only the emotional residue of an old pattern breaking. Sometimes it is what happens when your nervous system is still adjusting to a healthier standard. You are not doing something wrong just because it feels unfamiliar. You are not failing people just because they no longer get the same version of you that once came at your own expense. Growth often feels uncomfortable before it feels clean. There is a quiet form of courage in allowing others to be disappointed by your boundary without rushing to rescue them from that feeling. You do not have to explain yourself into exhaustion. You do not have to reverse your decision just because someone became colder, sadder, or more offended than you hoped. Their reaction belongs to them. Your responsibility is to remain honest, measured, and loyal to what protects your peace. That is enough. A life built on truth cannot survive if every act of self-care is followed by self-punishment. And the deeper truth is this: when you constantly choose others at the expense of yourself, you do not become more loving, you become depleted. You become resentful in quiet ways. You begin giving from emptiness and calling it virtue. Over time, that harms both you and the people around you, because love that is built on self-erasure eventually becomes unstable. It loses warmth. It loses sincerity. It turns into obligation. Choosing yourself in the healthy Stoic sense is not abandoning others. It is refusing to disappear inside your care for them. So do not confuse your peace with selfishness. Do not confuse your boundary with wrongdoing. And do not let someone else's discomfort become the judge of whether your self-respect is allowed to exist. A person who truly values you may need time to adjust, but they will not require your collapse in order to feel loved. Real closeness can survive your limits. Real respect can survive your no. What cannot survive it was probably living on too much access to begin with. Sometimes choosing yourself is not loud at all. It is simply the quiet decision to stop apologizing for having needs, for having limits, for having a life that also belongs to you. And once you stop feeling guilty for that, something inside you becomes lighter. Not because you care less, but because your care is no longer built on abandoning yourself. It becomes cleaner, stronger, more honest. And from that place, peace stops feeling like something you must earn. It starts feeling like something you are finally allowed to keep. Number 10. Never become smaller, just to keep someone comfortable. One of the saddest ways a person loses themselves is not by being rejected, but by slowly shrinking in order to avoid rejection. They soften what they really think. They hide what they really want. They lower their standards, reduce their presence, silence their truth, and make themselves easier to digest for people who feel threatened by honesty, strength, or depth. And the dangerous part is that this rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. It feels like adjustment. It feels like maturity. It feels like being easygoing, flexible, understanding. But after a while, something inside begins to ache because you realize you are no longer being loved as you are. You are being tolerated in the smaller shape you created to make others feel safe. This happens in families, in friendships, in romantic relationships, at work, almost everywhere. A person notices that their confidence makes someone uncomfortable, so they start dimming it. They see that their standards are called difficult, so they begin lowering them. They realize that speaking directly creates tension, so they become vague and quiet. Little by little, they adapt themselves around the fragility of others, until their whole way of being becomes organized around one hidden question: how can I stay acceptable here? And once that question takes control, peace becomes impossible, because peace does not grow where self-betrayal is constant. The Stoic mind sees dignity as something inward before anything outward. It is not about appearing powerful. It is about remaining aligned with what is true in you. And when you keep making yourself smaller to protect other people from discomfort, that alignment breaks. You may avoid conflict for a while. You may keep people close. You may preserve the surface of the relationship. But inwardly, resentment begins to form, not only toward them, but toward yourself, because some part of you knows the truth. Some part of you knows you are editing your soul just to remain welcome. And the painful irony is this: shrinking yourself does not even create the kind of closeness people hope it will. It only creates a false peace built on the absence of your full self. People may remain comfortable around you, yes, but they are comfortable around a reduced version of you. Around the version that asks for less, shines less, feels less, speaks less, expects less. That is not acceptance, that is conditional ease. The relationship survives, but something essential in you goes missing. Over time, you may not even know why you feel so tired, so flat, so disconnected. The reason is often simple. You have been surviving by becoming smaller than your own spirit. There is a very important difference between humility and self-erasure. Humility is strength without arrogance. It is grounded, calm, and self-aware. Self-erasure is fear pretending to be peace. It keeps sacrificing truth, so tension can be postponed. But tension postponed is not tension resolved. Eventually the cost shows up in your body, in your mood, in your private loneliness, in the strange grief of being surrounded by people while feeling unseen. Because the real self has not been rejected exactly, it has been hidden for too long. This is why one of the most necessary boundaries in life is refusing to reduce yourself for the comfort of those who only know how to relate to a diminished version of you. That does not mean becoming harsh, arrogant, or impossible. It means standing at your natural size, speaking with honesty, keeping your standards intact, allowing your presence to have weight without apologizing for it, letting people feel whatever they feel in response, without turning their discomfort into your duty. Some will adjust, some will respect you more, and some will fall away because they were never connected to your truth in the first place. Let that happen. A peaceful life cannot be built on chronic self-reduction. It cannot be built on hiding your clarity, diluting your convictions, or constantly making yourself less visible so others do not have to confront their own insecurity. At some point, you have to decide that losing false acceptance is a smaller price than losing yourself. And that is where real freedom begins. The moment you stop managing your size for the emotional convenience of others. The moment you stop apologizing for your standards, your voice, your growth, your depth. The moment you understand that being fully yourself may cost you some company, but becoming smaller will cost you your soul. That is the final lesson. Not everything should be given away, not your time, not your energy, not your peace, and certainly not your full self. Because once you begin protecting what is sacred within you, life becomes quieter, cleaner, and more honest. And the people who truly belong near you will never require you to disappear in order to stay.